Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. I'm your host, Olivia Atkin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We will give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Scott Ashworth. Scott is currently working for Overtime as head of safety and security. In addition to that, Scott is the founder and author of the Sentry Post. Prior to working for Overtime, Scott has also been the director of security for A&B Sports and Entertainment for 4 years and was a police lieutenant in Atlanta, working as a police officer for a total of 11 and a half years. You can find Scott on LinkedIn by searching Scott Ashworth. Hello, Scott. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Olivia. This is fantastic.
I'm so excited. To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Scott Ashworth?
Absolutely. Honestly, success to me, it's what goals I want to achieve and being able to not only get the education, but the experience to be able to manifest a successful outreach or, a successful performance to get me to those goals. Kind of like, we all know where we want to be when we grow up, or we know what we want to do, or what our life's plan is. And it's really just kind of putting together the pieces to get to that successful end.
And let's dive into that a little bit. Let's start at the very beginning. What led you to decide to go to the police academy and start your journey into protecting others?
Awesome. I love that question. So for me, when I graduated high school, I was, following in the footsteps of, my parents that were very successful in business. And so I went to a business, I went to go get my business degree at an undergraduate college. And I started to do all the classes. I did okay in my first 2 years. And then in my third year, I started to struggle significantly. I was never that great of a student in high school or even in college, but I just wasn't feeling it, and I wasn't getting the motivation. And I started to kind of go into a depression, if you will, because the goals that I was going after at the time, I wasn't passionate about. I didn't love, and because of that, I was starting to fail, and I felt like a failure. So I had a real moment when I asked myself, you're not happy. What did you want to do when you were 5 years old? And I did that. So I quit business school. I started applying to be a police officer. One of the first departments to accept me was Forest Park Police, which is just south of Atlanta. It borders Atlanta at Zone 3. We're very well known for our high crime rates. So it was, an amazing place to get experience. And I went into policing and I absolutely loved it. I took off. It was motivating. It was, I started to actually set the goals that I wanted to in life because I not only saw what I wanted, but I saw the pieces that I needed to achieve what I wanted. So that led me into just continuously learning and doing all of those things. And that's why I was in policing, and I had found it. I had found what my love was: protecting other people.
And I think that is something that is important to realize. Sometimes when you're not happy or it's not really your passion, you see that, like you saw it with going to business school, you were like, this isn't what I want to be doing. There, it affects your motivation at times. You're like, if I don't really want to be doing this, why am I doing it? Why am I spending hours every day doing this? And asking yourself, what would I do if I was 5 years old and my dream job sometimes can open your mind to revisit those goals, old goals you've had, and say, okay, let me try that. What's the harm in trying it? And for you, that really ended up being beneficial because you found your passion again. You found all the things in your mindset that was leading you or what you wanted to do to lead to your success all starting to fit together. So,
Absolutely.
what was it like transitioning from business school to being a police officer, especially in a high crime ridden area? That some officers don't go right into the mix of a very high populated crime area because they are newer. Some do. But what was that like for you, especially because, you first were in business school, so you had a little bit of a different mindset.
I mean, there were so many different emotions and feelings that you have when you go into that environment. Number one was you'd already set yourself up to be a business person. So to make a considerable amount of money, to be able to take care of your family. And by making a move to go into public service, you really are doing the public a service because you're not going to get paid anything for a very long time. It's sad what our first responders or teachers and stuff like that get paid because of the amount of people they touch across a large landscape of community. But honestly, that was number one. Is I thought I was going to be, going into a profession that wasn't going to make me as much money or as something as could before. And then you tie into the fact that yes, it's very scary to go into that type of profession. I grew up in an inner city. I went to inner city middle schools, high schools. I didn't grow up in a very sheltered environment. I saw a lot of things that most people don't see when they're growing up. And so even though that somewhat prepared me for what I was going to see, it's still very you're afraid of everything. Just the idea of walking up to a car that you're pulling over for simply running a stop sign, that person in the front seat may have a felony and they're saying to themselves, I'd rather have a shootout than go back to jail. And you're just walking up to the window thinking everything's okay. I might give this person a warning. I might give them a $20 ticket. And then you find out that they're going to take that action. So that kind of stuff is terrifying. But honestly, it's like you said, I saw the passion there. I saw the light. And even those fears and those kind of, being afraid of not making enough money or getting hurt was just went by the wayside when you found out that your goal is to protect people and there's purpose there.
And I think that's really important to realize is when you have a purpose, you start to prioritize what's really important for you to meet that purpose and be successful. So for you and a lot of other people, especially first responders, it isn't necessarily the amount of hours you're working. I know police officers right now who are working 20-hour shifts sometimes. They'll work days on end, or it might not be the money, or it might not be some of those things, but it's making a difference. It's making the environment that they're serving better. And when you start to, whether you're in law enforcement, you're a first responder, or it's your everyday life, when you start to prioritize what's really important and what your purpose is, those things that society can say is really important, you might realize isn't as important when you take the step back.
Absolutely.
Scott, you did things in a very fast pace. So I want to touch upon that. You became a lieutenant within roughly 6 years of entering the police force, which for our listeners, I did some research on this and I want to really heighten when we talk about success, what that means and what that can look like. And 6 years to becoming a lieutenant is very fast. So to put it in perspective, I asked a few of my law enforcement friends who are in a city like Philadelphia or a city like Camden or the suburbs area. And the shortest amount of time I got was 12, which averages, you did that in half the time. So to put it in perspective, when we're going to talk about this next, Scott really saw his goals and went for it because I got a range from, yeah, it could be possible in about 12 years, maybe a little less, to 25 years down the road while you're in your police department, unless you change, maybe something happens. But that really is a fast paced growth. What led you to saying, okay, I want to become a lieutenant and taking those steps to guide you to kind of accelerate your career to that position?
Well, I think there's actually a quote from Kobe Bryant that I really love in this instance because it's really humbling, but at the same time, it exemplifies what it takes to get there. He once said that he'll never be the greatest basketball player of all time, but he will be the most obsessed. And when I hear that, it basically tells me that, you may have somebody who can do something better than you because they were blessed with a certain level of, of intelligence, or with, an athletic ability. But if you're more obsessed than they are of learning or succeeding, you will ultimately outperform that person. And the reason is because nothing is stopping you. Any hurdle that comes, you're just jumping over it. With law enforcement, and becoming a lieutenant as quick as possible was just because I ate, slept, breathed law enforcement, and I started to take every class that was humanly possible. A person that was never good throughout his entire schooling career, I probably had all C's in high school. I probably did below a 2.0 in college when I was in business school, is now going to a college and getting getting A's in every single one of his class. And it's because I found that piece of, purpose and love and for something. And you cannot stop a driven individual when they have the end goal in mind, and they protect that goal ferociously. So for 6 years, a lot of people might say that, well, he doesn't know what everybody else at that 12-year mark knows when they're a lieutenant. The truth is that I do. It's just that I spent 12 years within that 6 years learning it. While most people are, sitting on their couch playing Angry Birds, or, whatever, which is nothing wrong with it. It just so happens that my obsession wouldn't let me do that. It had me on websites and on online classes while I sit there on the couch on my free time. So, and it's maybe not the best, but I absolutely love it. I get a lot out of it. I love learning. I love, the feeling of having knowledge and being able to put it towards something, a purposeful job and something else. And so, I love it and I ate it up. And that's kind of what led me to that success and continues to this day.
And I want to touch upon that a little bit more. So when you go into a any department within policing or first responders or anything like that, but specifically right now, the police department, and you are trying to grow and accelerate, and it is happening at a faster speed. How do you handle that with the long hours? Because, you know, depending on what department you are in, for a first responder across the board, you can be doing shifts from, you know, 8 hours to 12, to if you have to work overtime, or if there's something big happening, or even if you're not, and for example, you're in business and all of a sudden something pops up. Okay, we have this big project. You have to work the extra hours to make sure it's done by Friday, by that deadline. How did you keep that passion alive to continue to absorb the information, to continue to grow, and then get there and then say, "Yeah, I have the seat at the table," even though you think, the person who's been here 12 years should have the seat? I know what I'm talking about. And how did you then take that and put it into affecting the community in a good way through leading your department?
So it's, looking back on it, it's very easy to see why the results turned out like they did. In the moment, you're exactly right. I constantly had imposter syndrome, thinking that, here I am. Who am I to be better than this amazingly smart counterpart to my left, who is also a lieutenant, but did it in 12 years? And when I look back, it's the separation of that obsession. So, I go into, when I was first starting out as an investigator, roughly about 2 years after I started, I was working homicides, and my schedule looked like this. I would go to school at 8 in the morning, and then I would leave at 1. I'd go get lunch between 1 and 1:30, and then I would eat on the way to the PD. When I got to the police department at 2 o'clock, I would do a 2 o'clock to 11 o'clock shift. And that's working murders and robberies and you name it. You're running and gunning. So you're not doing anything or thinking about schoolwork. You're going into work. And then you repeat that. On the weekends, you did homework, you did papers. You tried to have a personal life. But it's that drive that it literally was what everybody else was doing. I doubled. So to be able to get somewhere in 6 years as opposed to 12 is literally because my off time was dedicated to supplementing that experience. And so I was able to do those things. And love, one story I have is that I remember working a homicide for like 48 hours, and I had been up, I was in uniform, I had a final, and I was running late to the final. I get there and I get there just in time. But one piece of advice I'd give to any police officer is just make sure you know your surroundings, because people in a very populated class about to take a test are extremely alarmed when anybody in a law enforcement uniform runs into a classroom out of breath. But finally, they kind of eased off when I said, sorry, I'm late. Need to take my test. Everybody took a collective, sigh of relief. But it just goes to show what I was trying to do in such a short amount of time. You really had to compact it. It wasn't easy, but it was definitely worth it. And when I look back, it's that kind of work ethic and that kind of, um, you know, dedication that I see. Yeah, I definitely should have been in the room with people that have done 12 years, 20 years, because not only did I have the education and the experience that I pushed, into having, I also had the drive.
And I think that's really important and key to bring up right now is when you think you can do something and like you did, you said, "Okay, I'm gonna work that 48-hour shift. I'm gonna take care of business on, you know, in the department while I'm there, and then I'm gonna rush right and because that exam is important too and get it done." No matter your age, you can have your growth at your own rate, whether that's, you know, 10 years working somewhere or 4. If you put in the effort, you put in the time, and especially when you're driven, you can get anywhere as fast as you want. You might have to give up some things along the way. You might have to prioritize and say, okay, do I stay up 2 hours and lose those 2 hours of sleep to finish taking this practice test or to do this assignment or, to set my business apart? Or do I sleep for the 2 hours? And a lot of times, especially if you're trying to get somewhere fast or grow personally or professionally, like we talk about here, it is sometimes taking those 2 hours and going, "Okay, I need to prioritize what these 2 hours are for and what I really want to get out of that time." Because the other part of that is, yes, like Scott said, you do lose time. There are things in your personal life, and Scott, you said it well. You try to have a personal life. It can be hard when you're working really long hours, when things start to merge together, when you get tunnel vision. But in the long run, it can be so beneficial that sometimes you have to say, is that personal time or that personal life, this one event, is it worth it? Or can I say, hey, guys, I'm really only going to be able to show up for 30 minutes. So let me just tell you now, I can't attend. But 2 weeks from now, when this is done, let's go out and do this. So it's that balance to some extent.
Mhm.
Scott, you became a lieutenant, and what was it like leading other police officers in times of uncertainty, and how do you handle that? Because a lot of that mindset of that fight or flight can transition no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing in a high pace, pressure cooker environment. So how do you handle that?
There's nothing like it. You can have, the roles that I have now are pretty, they're a higher up leadership role. I have a lot of people that report to me or that, contractors that, I'm basically running that show, but there's really no stress and or, anything like leading people into a dangerous job. When you send somebody into an area where there's something going on that could hurt them or be damaging, you really got to be smarter. You got to really think and be well trained and be purposeful about the decisions that you're making. um, you have to well, you also have to take a lot of responsibility and own that responsibility and be able to make quick decisions. Anybody who is even slightly indecisive in law enforcement can get into trouble real quick or put somebody in danger. And it goes back to really quality training. One of the I would act or I would lead using scenarios that I had been in and education that I had taken in or skills that I had grown. And I would grab guys by the back of the bulletproof vest and pull them back in situations where they're about to do something dangerous. Or, you would, get very direct on the radio if somebody was about to make a misstep that could hurt them or others. So you really have to grow that confidence, that you know what you're doing, that you know what you're talking about. Because if you don't have that confidence, you will take too long to react, and then somebody who is putting themselves in danger might continue to do so and actually fall into that trap. So that kind of leadership in law enforcement, military, high stress situations, you've got to have that direct confidence. And if not, you're danger to everybody around you, and you just need to sit down, and that's fine too. And then that happens to every leader. If you don't have that confidence that day, don't take over the lead. Let somebody else do it, because you really want to protect the people you're with and who make sound decisions.
And that right there, taking ownership of your confidence. If you have it, own it. Bring it to the table. Sometimes whether it might be a certain situation, it might be how long you've been in the role, people might not look at you. When you insert your confidence and you say, "No, I really know what I'm talking about. Listen up." Then people respond to that. It's not necessarily always sometimes, like they say, like falling in line. It is very much saying, you need to take and listen to what I'm saying because I know what I'm talking about. And when you're able to assert that into a situation, other people pick up on that and they're more willing to follow you and listen to you. And even if they don't agree with you, hear you out because they can hear it in your tone, they can see it in your body language. They understand that you do know more than maybe what they do. And that is really the opposite effect that you brought up is really key too. If you're not on your A game or you don't know something, as a leader, you have to be able to say, the person who does needs to take over. If you're having a bad day, especially in a high pressure environment where there can be lives on the line, you have to say, today's my bad day. It is okay. When you acknowledge it, people respect you a lot more than if you try to fake it till you make it and something bad ends up happening.
Self-awareness is hands down one of the most important leadership tools, I think, because the ability to understand how you're affecting the ecosystem is paramount. And it's very difficult for people because it's self-criticism, and a lot of people don't want to think the negativity about themselves. But some of the leaders that I respect the most are the ones that came to me and said, "Hey, I had this event happen to me today. I am not good to control this. Can you take over?" I would take over. And guess what? I've been there. I've done that. I've had things, life happens. People in your life pass away. Things happen, traumatic events happen, and some days you're just not there. And so the moment that you try to muster on and you do something, you will end up, if you're not in the right mind space, you will end up hurting others or yourself. And you just need to be able to recognize that and pass along the baton.
And it's even more than that. When you sit there and you say, and you brought this up, you respect people who say, listen, I know myself. I know how I'm feeling right now. And I know this situation, I'm not at my best. So let someone who can be at their best do it so I can do a good job in the role I'm capable of doing right now. When you have that self awareness, you're able to say, what is better for everyone in this environment? It's not just, hey, am I going to look good? Hey, am I going to sit here and is everyone gonna think that I'm less than because I don't say, "You know what? Let me hand the baton off to someone else. Let someone else have the opportunity because they will perform better right now." People end up respecting you a lot more because of that, and they end up saying, "Okay, I wanna be that leader." I think it's really important to be able to sit back and say, "This is what's going on." When you share that, people relate to you more. People say, "Yeah, I've been there." And it also is a learning experience for you in the sense of you can learn from others in your environment. Those people you surround yourself, how do they step up in a situation? How do they support you? Not just by stepping up and being a leader themselves, but how do they then turn around and support you to make sure that you're okay and vice versa? When someone else in that environment, has to step down or it's just not in the mindset, how do you support your fellow, brothers and sisters, whether it's in the line of duty or at work or in your personal life? When you see someone struggling and not at their best, what do you do, even if they don't come out and say it? Scott, you decided to leave the police department and go into the private sector. What made you decide to make that change?
Well, I was at a crossroads. I had three options in front of me. Number one was to continue in local law enforcement. As you said, I'd been very successful in a short amount of time, so I had a lot of confidence that I would continue to grow in that same fashion. And then I was in the application process for the FBI, and I actually made it to the end of the process with the FBI. And I also had my eyes set on private sector security. Going back to my business school days, I learned that it wasn't my non-interest in business that was driving my bad grades or my lack of motivation. It was actually just I didn't know what was out there in the business world that it motivated me the most. And so I started to see corporate security as a possible next move for me as well. And when I evaluated everything, I had a couple opportunities coming in, and one really stuck out. I was born and raised in the city of Atlanta. I'm a huge sports nut, and I love protecting people. And one job came along. I was offered the position to be the director of security for Atlanta United, the football team if you're from Europe, soccer team if you're from America. Which was under the A&B Sports and Entertainment organization, which also included the Atlanta Falcons, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, PGA Superstores, and other entities. So I joined on with them. I made the decision. I wanted to go to corporate security. The FBI would have been great, but it would have been a lot of struggle in the beginning. You're not able to really pick where you want to go in the US. And, it would have been roughly about the same amount of pay and opportunity. But I really found that all three of those paths gave me the opportunity to protect a community. One was a local community, one was a federal community, and the third was a business community, which includes your staff, your customers, your fans, everything under the sun. So I still have that purpose piece.
And I like how you say that. It's finding your purpose and then understanding all the paths that are out there. Sometimes when you get into one path, you don't necessarily understand all the other areas you can succeed in or that are out there. And so for you, you took a step back and you had multiple different paths you could go down to, multiple different opportunities in front of you at the same time. And you sat there and you kind of figured out what was best for you, not just in the short term, but the long term. And I think that's important, especially to some of our listeners today. You know, right now we're entering an environment where companies after companies are doing mass layoffs. Um, you're in an environment where you're unsure of what could be happening tomorrow. And understanding what your purpose is and what your passion is allows you to also understand what other and investigate. I think that's important too. And investigate what other opportunities and possibilities can you do with your experiences, your education, and most importantly, that passion. For you, it's the community, protecting your community. And I really like how you put it in the perspective of you have your public, your local community, the bigger community, or even the business community. And for you, you chose sports. How was it adapting to an environment where you're protecting individuals, but more during, the sporting events, those big events, compared to solving homicides?
Well, there's a ton of differences between the public sector arena and the private sector. And there's a huge transition period that's going to happen. And one of the most important things that I realized when I first made the jump, and that I try to tell so many people coming, following my footsteps, is that we really have to humble ourselves in A lot of people in law enforcement think that there is this position that is just waiting for them, that they're supposed to just fall into when they get out of law enforcement. That's not the case. Corporate security is different than law enforcement, and you have a great framework, but you are definitely not an expert in corporate security. You're basically a rookie again with a great foundation. So, having to learn the ins and outs of corporate environment. In law enforcement, we'd sit around in roll call and we would talk about that stuff, homicides. We would talk about, drug dealers or gang members that we had interactions with. We were cursing, we were saying uncouth things. And there's absolutely no way, shape, or form you'd go into a corporate security environment and start saying these same things or having these conversations without getting talked to by HR in 30 minutes. So, that's one example of the type of disconnect that it is. And it's very hard for people that have been in law enforcement to make that transition because they see the differences as wrong. They see what they've done for so many years as that's how jobs work. Like you're supposed to do it this way, not that. And so when they get into that world, they get skittish because they're not used to it and they might jump or go back to law enforcement because it was different, it was unfamiliar, and that kind of thing is terrifying, especially when you're making such a big life movements as changing careers. So it's not easy, it's really difficult. The key to success for me was having individuals that had already made that path sum up their successful strategies and really just sit me down, humble me, and tell me, you're going to be fine. You just have to learn again. You have to have that same drive you did in law enforcement, and you have to just continuously take it in like a sponge. So that was my key to success, is having those mentors, and even in some cases mentees, just kind of give you the confidence that you're in the right place. You just need to have that drive and continue moving forward.
And I think that's really important to understand that there is a transition and there isn't, you know, in some paths, there's a right way to doing something. Whether you're in a certain company and you switch to a different company and they operate differently, doesn't necessarily mean one sector business is doing better than another sector where you're doing the same thing. Whether you're in law enforcement, there are ways you operate in, a local police department versus, a federal police department or that private sector. And understanding that things operate differently can be humbling. You have to stay humble and not get too frustrated or overwhelmed because when you do that, you're hurting yourself, you're hurting your own potential, and you want to succeed. The reason you did this was because you had a passion, you saw what you could be doing, and you have to give yourself a break at some point to say, "Yes, I don't know," or "I thought this was the right way, but tell me why it isn't in this scenario and let me learn from it." One thing people don't understand, and I want you to go a little bit into this, is there are some myths and a little bit debunking, I would say, that I want you to do with what is it like going or what you thought, of the private sector when you were in local police versus once you got there? You were like, "Okay, what people thought about this at my police department is not actually accurate." And what I thought before, how did that change?
I think it's that piece, right? So I don't know why we have this feeling about law enforcement. Most police officers, we go into every situation thinking that we're going to be the perfect person, the perfect match for a job. Like corporate security, we all just think that because we were a police officer, we're going up for jobs in the security world against people that were former security guards. So we're going to inevitably have some kind of higher step over everybody. But the truth of the matter is when you're going from law enforcement to a security role, you're not only doing that, you're going up against countless other police officers who are just like you. You're going up against security professionals who have masters and doctorates in security. You're going up against people who were amazing, in other fields that have now found that their tools and skills that they've trained and learned and used apply to some sector of security and they've transferred over. You are not the king applicant when it comes to that. And I think that's the main disconnect from law enforcement. The law enforcement that's perceived when they want to go to corporate security, and the law enforcement piece when you actually get to applying and being in the space. Currently, right now, I am with a successful law enforcement career and a successful security career. There are still some people who are only been in the security industry that are top of jobs for me, or jobs that I go out for, or other professions. So it's understanding that yes, you do have a phenomenal framework on which to build and learn and develop in corporate security. You do need to be humble enough to know that you are starting over again and that your learning curve is just a little bit quicker than some others.
You now work for Overtime, where you run security, and we've had the discussion where it's really interesting because that organization is growing. You really have a seat at the table to talk about safety, to talk about how things could be done from protecting, whether it's the members of the organization or the attendants of the population that attends. What is something you have learned from running, that kind of environment and being in the private sector that you've taken a step back and said, I wish I had that skill while working as a police officer, and I wish I knew that or had that outlook.
The one thing, and I had a little bit of this in policing, and I think this helped me with my transition, but it's the customer service piece. So, in law enforcement, we get into this mode of becoming these enforcers. Like it's very black and white. You're going to jail because that's the law. You're going to, you got pulled over because that's the law. Like it's just you follow this script to a T. A lot of people go in there personalityless. Nobody ever thinks of the goofy police officer because there's and not saying that they're not there, because I thought of myself as one of them. I never had a serious statement when I walked up to a car I pulled over. I always started with a joke. But at the same time, I still fell into the trap of being this kind of robotic enforcer of rules. And honestly, when I get into the world of corporate security and you are, focusing more on a consumer aspect, you start to realize what kind of, um, you know, tactics you can use to get somebody to do what you want them to do, or to do what the organization wants you to do, just by attempting to please them, or see their needs, and help them take care of that. Some of the stuff that I've learned in corporate security, if I went back to a very hostile domestic situation, I probably would be able to just get them to the point where they're ready to renew their vows before I leave. It's being able to coax people into thinking that your product is what they really need to solve their problems. And in law enforcement, we don't sell them our products. We sell them a blanket statement of, you do this, you go to jail. If you don't do this, you don't go to jail. No, we can actually be very, very open and think of law enforcement as a consumer product. Like, you are paying taxes, you are doing this. We should be putting on a nice face, and we should be approachable. We should be the person that people feel comfortable with coming and saying and telling us their problems. None of us like to go to a store where if we want to return an item, they give us trouble or give us a problem. But if they welcome us and they make it easy, then of course we're going to go back and we're going to continue our patronage with that store. So that's what I wish I had known in law enforcement. My diplomatic side helped there, but I wish it was a little bit more honed in. And so I think that's key.
And especially sometimes during a game when things can be happening, like you said, that diplomatic trying to, it isn't this way is what's going to happen. Sometimes, let's be honest, you're at a game, a fan's getting really rowdy. They might be, do something they really shouldn't that can land them. in an environment they don't wanna be in. And you have to be like, "Listen, you keep going down this route, we're gonna have to take you, downstairs. We're gonna have to separate you." But how have you used those skills of, trying to defuse a situation, especially in an environment that's really loud? There's a lot of moving pieces. Not everyone, a lot of people are drinking, they're having fun, they just want to continue to have fun. Because especially, and I'll just use this as an example, more and more we're seeing fans jump onto the fields, run across the field, doing stuff like that. And what a lot of fans don't realize, and I learned this when working for the NFL, is you do that, you're paying lots of fines. You're being banned from an arena for life if you're lucky. Some arenas, as you brought up earlier, cover, concerts, cover games, cover a lot of different things. You get banned from all that for life. And there can be a lot of repercussions because a lot of um sporting events, the complexes are federal property. So it's a not just like, oh, we'll take Philadelphia. Uh the Philadelphia Eagles, it's their property. It's the city of Philadelphia. I'll only get in trouble by Philadelphia. It's no, you're getting in trouble with the state of Pennsylvania. You're getting in trouble with the United States because of how the leagues are run. So for you, how do you kind of handle situations or train others to handle situations where things with the fan can really escalate?
So the best thing that anybody can do is continuously learn and know exactly what the context is for what your job is to do. So explaining to people the context to why these things are happening is extremely important. And it can take all of the argument out of somebody's, take the wind out of their sails, if you will. You know, in security, we're often looked at as these, no personality types that are standing at a door with an earpiece hanging down, telling people you can't do this, you can't do that. The problem is when you tell somebody you can't do this and you can't do that, they don't always see the context, and it becomes a very much, why are you telling me I can't do this, this, that. What you have to do is you have to be real clear and concise and real intelligent conversations with these people and let them know this is why this happens. You bring up the point of people running onto the field, and I actually had a conversation about this earlier. It's become so cavalier nowadays that I think a lot of people don't understand why it's looked at, or don't remember why it's looked at as such a polarizing type thing to do. And it's because, since the beginning of time and since the Romans in the Colosseum were having large events, people would use these types of platforms to do harm to others while also gaining a mass audience so that their mission or their message is received by a ton of people. And so we do face that in a world today where people wanting to do nothing but harm large masses of people and do it on a scale that's televised to an ESPN audience or a primetime audience. And so when people jump a fence and run towards the middle of where all the broadcast cameras are pointed at, it's similar to if I just got up from my seat in the back of an in-flight plane and just started running up the aisle with a comb in my hand. You're going to elicit thousands of different emotions and opinions from people, but it's not fun. It's not quirky. It's really one of the things that, yeah, you might be good intention today, but the guy who does it tomorrow might actually have intentions of hurting 50 people. And so when you do that, you're exploiting the fact that, oh, well, I'm doing it and it's frowned upon. It's not frowned upon. It's a serious security incident. So a lot of people don't see that. And if you explain that to people, they don't see it as this, oh, well, why am I getting in trouble? I just ran across some grass. No, you're signaling to a bunch of people who are here to protect you from the worst catastrophic events that there might be one of those events happening. And, so bringing that kind of context to people, even to the point where, I've had people who are upset. Well, your guard told me I couldn't go that way, and my seat's right there, and this, that. Well, ma'am, the reason you can't go that way is because the catering staff goes back and forth. And we've had people injured when they walked past there and they didn't see the catering staff. And the last thing I want you to do is get hurt, go to a hospital, or be out of work for 30 days just because we wanted to take a shortcut. Because I want you to go that way too, but I don't want you to get hurt. When you do that and you make it about them and you give them context to why it's happening, they can't argue anymore. And if they do argue, it becomes a little bit more juvenile on their end, and a lot of times they'll see that.
And I want to take that a step farther. You brought up some really great points of, you know, having that conversation, making it understandable of why something is the way it is. But something that really hit home was the fact that you brought up, whether it's running a field, you see these, mass shootings happening. You always have to be on alarm. You never know, as someone who's protecting, I mean, a stadium could hold hundreds and thousands of individuals. So when you look at it as in this one place in these, next X amount of hours, we're going to get that traction. And your head has to be on a swivel during those X amount of hours because we are in more of an environment where certain things people do, like running a field, has become more of a, oh, that's a fun idea, especially once I've had a few beers. It's an idea. Let's just do it, to something bigger can be happening and you don't know. So in those moments of always, when the stadium gets filled and you have to have your head on the swivel, or the moments of saying, is this going to be what I think it is, or is it going to really escalate really quickly? How do you have that mindset and try to gauge what could be happening and prepare for it?
I mean, it's not an easy thing, and honestly, there's a lot of I believe there's a lot of mental health issues that come along with it. It's something that I've talked about on, my blog, the sentrypost.com. It's, us as professionals, we're constantly the companies or the police department's hypochondriacs. It's why they hire us. We're supposed to think of the worst case scenario and then provide mitigation strategies to make sure that if, that it never happens. And if it does happen, that we get out of it with less casualties or less people hurt than it could have been. And so we constantly, it's what we call the security white noise. There is no off time for a security person because terrorists don't take time off, you know, uh, criminals don't take time off. So in the back of our mind, it's always this buzzing that if nothing is happening, then it's just in the works of happening. And when we see stuff like people running onto the field, or, a lot of people think that we're overreacting when we react so, outwardly, or, so quickly, or run or chase somebody. But you really just don't know, because that same person that's thinking, oh, well, that's silly, why are they putting that up? Is often the same person that would ask, oh my God, why couldn't they get there 10 seconds earlier if something tragic happens? So yeah, we do a lot of things very reactively. We do things, and we're constantly thinking. So the best security people in the world are reevaluating every situation on a second by second basis. So they're running into a situation of a guy running on field, and they're determining in their head, yes, this guy looks like he's just your average fan that drank too much. And then he goes and reaches in his shirt, and now the person thinks, okay, maybe not. And then you're consistently going back and forth, and you want to make the best decision. You don't want to just tackle a guy who's doing something stupid and, maybe cause harm to you or them. But at the same time, you don't want them to get away from you and then go and hurt somebody that wasn't prepared or wasn't able to protect themselves. So, constantly keeping that evaluation it can, it's really important. But I always preach, I'm like, you make sure that we know and take stock of what we're doing, because, most people don't think about this stuff. People might think about the most tragic events that could happen maybe once every hour or a few hours. Security professionals think about this at a 10,000 times more increased pace than the normal person. So we constantly live in the worst case scenario. We've seen ugly stuff. And so We're always prepared, but any security professional that may watch this, just make sure you always take mental stock of what you got going on.
And I think that's really important as well that you brought up the fact that you have to reevaluate. And no matter what you're in, whether it's law enforcement, a first responder, responding to a call, whether you're in an ambulance and hey, what direction was there going to be a faster direction to save someone's life? If you're in any business environment, when something goes wrong and who knows how many people can be affected, whether supply chain, for example, especially during COVID and even now, there can be supply issues. So, okay, didn't get there on time. Reevaluating the situation and taking stock in accountability of what you could have done different, but a situation can help prevent future situations. And our lessons learned at the end of the day, we all can take every situation, and when you reevaluate it, say, "What can I have done better? What did I do good? What can I pass along to others from these experiences?" And that in itself is such a powerful thing to help mentor others to grow personally or professionally and take it into different environments. Scott, how can people get in touch with you if they would like to connect with you?
I'm an open book, which is, it's not always the way in security, because security we're very closed off, because a lot of times we do things that bring us and maybe the people around us into a threatening position. And people don't always like that we stop things, or we're targets because we protect. But I'm different. Maybe it's not the smartest thing in the world, but you know what? I love being open book for people and being, somebody that can answer questions. The easiest way is to contact me through the sentrypost.com, which is a non-for-profit. Uh, it's basically an information sharing hub where, I've posted some blog posts, some videos. It's about helping people from the public sector, whether it be law enforcement, EMS, military, transfer over into the private sector. It's career advice, what's helped me succeed. Caution, it may not help everybody succeed, but they're very good tips that I've been able to find in my career that have helped me succeed, that, I want to help put them out there so people can understand it. So contacting me through the sentrypost.com is always good. LinkedIn is a good method. I try to get to every single message that I get. Sometimes the days get rough with that education, the work, the family, but I do try to get to them as quick as possible and help as many people as possible, because I would not be here without the people that did exactly what I'm doing for me, you know, 15 years ago in law enforcement and then 6 years ago in security. So I'm very grateful, and this is just my way to help pay it back. But please, anybody who ever has a question or anything that even a topic they just want to discuss, please reach out.
And let me add to this that if you follow Scott on LinkedIn or you have a chance to read the Century Post, it is very good and very helpful. Scott does when he is saying right now, he does get back to people. He's only trying to help. That is very true. Um I sent Scott a message in less than like 12 hours. He responded, and I sent it at night. So I wasn't expecting a response, but he responded. We've had great conversation. He is very open. And I think that's very much why he has been so successful. Scott very very much wants to give back and pay it forward. And you see that with the Sentry Post and everything he does across the board. And it is great, even if you just want to ask a question, if you're a fellow law enforcement officer or learn more, you definitely go to the Sentry Post because there's a lot of great content there as well. Thank you, Scott Ashworth, for all of your insight today.
No, thank you, Olivia. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I love your program. So hopefully what's discussed here can really make some really positive waves.
And I think it will. I think a lot of people can get different messages out of your journey, and I think that is really important. So a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation is you don't have to be the the best. But as long as you can be obsessed about something, you can achieve anything you put your mindset to. And I think that's really important in the aspect of sometimes it's the slowest individual, the one who sits there and really takes the time to understand something that will outperform everyone else. And that can be in the long run, but it can be in a high pressure cooker environment that sometimes it's having that knowledge and being obsessed with getting the information that can make or break what you're trying to do, as well as own the responsibility. When you're in charge, when you know what you're talking about, own it. Be responsible for it and be confident in yourself and be confident in what the outcome can be. Not everything goes perfectly, but if you're confident in what you can provide, what you can add to a conversation, how you can handle something, show that confidence. Don't be scared. And in that will let you grow as an individual, but other people can grow as well. So never turn that down and that responsibility, because it is a responsibility, not just to yourself, but to others, as well as you have to get humble. Sometimes you don't know everything in a situation, and what you do know might not be the correct information for that specific scenario. So sometimes, especially when you're going from the public sector to private sector, it is okay to get humble. It is key to get humble. As Scott discussed earlier, you have to be humble to understand situations and grow from that. And there is different things that different individuals and different paths can lead you to. As Scott discussed earlier, the if he had some of the tools he had in the public sector, hey, that domestic call could end up renewing someone's vows. You never know. As well as take stock of what you're doing and be proud of that. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Scott Ashworth. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.